All right. Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to say, call halayim. Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rakal Quitash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who have taught me this truth and who rule well in this truth. Shalom to the 144,000 and the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel that is scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. Peace and mercy unto you, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. You are the true Hebrew Israelites that the Bible speaks of. You are the true chosen people of the book of the Bible. All right, so I want to get into some words, man. As you see on screen right here, I got the etymology queued up for the word rigor and the etymology of the word afflict. All right, because this is how the ancient Egyptians, all right, dealt with us, all right, during the time of Moses before we crossed the Red Sea. All right, and you know, America being the modern day Egypt and Esau Edom being the modern day Egyptian, all right, that's how he rules over us as well. All right, America being spiritual Egypt, all right, we're being dealt with the same way we was dealt with in ancient Egypt, very harsh and rigor-like. You understand? So I want to get into that, you know, Exodus, the first chapter, and you know, we'll get into these words, rigor and afflict. The same way we was afflicted in ancient Egypt, we're afflicted in modern day Egypt. Shit, even worse. All right. You know, we was dealt very harshly, you know, in ancient Egypt, as we're going to read in the scriptures. And that's how we were dealt here in America. The same way, there's nothing new under the sun. All right. And, you know, America being spiritual Egypt, when you read Revelation, the 11th chapter, America is known as spiritual Egypt, spiritual Sodom and spiritual Egypt. All right. So let's get into Exodus real quick. And you know, I hope this lesson is edifying, you know. All right, so Exodus 1, and I'll start at verse 8, but the point is in 13 and 14 as well. All right, so it says Exodus 1 and 8, it says, now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters. Yeah, so we had taskmasters over us, man. All right. It says to what? To afflict them. So we were afflicted, and we go and get that word afflict. All right. It says therefore they did set over them. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. All right. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. All right. It says, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, because that was prophecy. All right. In Genesis, the 46th chapter, the third verse. All right. When the Lord said, matter of fact, let's get it. All right, because that's where we became a people, a great nation. All right, so let's get Genesis 46. I'll read it real quick. It says, Genesis 46 and 3, it says, and he said, I am the Most High Yahweh. All right, the Most High Yahweh of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. So we became a very great nation in the land of Egypt. That's when we became a nation. All right, in the land of Egypt, right? So let's go back to Exodus, the first chapter. All right, I think we was at the 12th verse, right? Yeah, it says, but the more they afflicted them, yeah, we were afflicted by the Egyptians, and we're being afflicted by the modern day Egyptians, all right, which is Esau, Edom. All right, the modern, this is spiritual Egypt, man. All right, it says, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. All right, this is the point. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. All right, yeah, we served with very great rigor, man. All right, we was hard captives and hard slaves in the land of Egypt, to the Egyptians, man. You know, but you got you simple, stupid, coon-ass Negroes that think we descend from the Egyptians, man. The Egyptians had us in slavery, man. You know? It says, verse 13, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. All right? So our lives were very bitter, just like how our lives are bitter now. That's why the scriptures say, they love not their lives unto death. Shit, we rather die, be put to death for this word, this truth. You know, for the name of Yahweh, Bahashim Yahweh Shai, the testimony of this word. You know? It says, and they made their lives, because that's an automatic crown, that's the kingdom of heaven, and we gonna get the hell up out of here, man. You know? It says, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. And did not the Lord say that he gonna free us from this hard bondage wherein thou was made to serve? That's Isaiah 14 chapter, man. So that same hard bondage that we went through in ancient Egypt, that same hard bondage we went through in modern day Egypt, spiritual Egypt, which is America, and even more. Because Esau, Edom, is our number one, our top enemy, man. So he dealt harshly with us more than any other nation. You know? Shit, we was under Esau, Edom's we was in captivity under Esau, Edom a couple times. The Greeks, the Romans, and now, you know? It says, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. All right? So we the ones that built the pyramids, man. It says, they made our lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick. What do you think we was building, man? With mortar and brick. The pyramids, man. All right? It says, and in all manners of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. All right? So we serve with rigor, man. You know? They enslaved us with rigor. Right? Let's read it. So now let's get the word rigor. All right? The etymology of the word rigor. Right? It says rigor. All right? Late 14th century rigor. All right? Harshness, severity in dealing with persons. So they dealt with us in a very great, in a severe way. With hard bondage in a severe way. Right? It says force, cruelty. Bro, the same way we was dealt with in ancient Egypt is the way we were dealt with in America, because this is modern day Egypt. This is spiritual Egypt. America. All right? It says harshness, severity in dealing with persons. Force, cruelty, from Old French rigor. Strength, hardness, all right, from Latin rigorem. Numbness, stiffness. So we was probably worked to death till we couldn't even feel our bodies anymore, till we was numb as hell, right? So these nations, you know, as the scriptures say, all they that devoured thee shall be devoured. That's Jeremiah 30:16. And all that prey upon thee will I give thee for a prey. And all your adversaries, every one of them shall go into captivity. Everybody that had us in the captivity has to go into captivity. That's Jeremiah 30:16, right? So it says numbness, stiffness, hardness, firmness, roughness, rudeness. All right, stretched, be stiff. All right. So that's how the ancient Egyptians dealt with us, and that's how Esau Edom dealt with us. And since he's our top enemy, you know, he dealt with us way worse than any other nation, man. So, bro, imagine how, you know, when you go through the that's why Esau Edom is trying to delete the history, man, especially about slavery. Read the book called Devastation of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas, all right, and other history books that go, other scholarly books, man, that go into that history, that information in a deep way. The way Esau Edom dealt with us, man, you know, since they came over here on the other side of this world, since the very second they came over here on the other side of this world, the way they dealt with this is on a way that your mind can't even fathom, or you can't even wrap your head around it, man. You know? So it says rigor, you know, harshness, severity in dealing with persons, force, cruelty, all right, of old French rigor, strength, hardness, all right. Again, it says harshness, severity in dealing with persons, force, cruelty, all right, numbness, stiffness, right. And let's also get the word afflict, right, because it said they afflicted us, right. Let's read that again. It says, therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, all right, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. And that's the spirit, bro. We built up ancient Egypt and we built up modern day Egypt, America. We built this place, man. It says, and they built for Pharaoh, meaning the Israelites, they built for Pharaoh, which was the king of Egypt, all right? They built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. So we built up ancient Egypt and we built up modern day Egypt for free. In captivity, bondage, man. And just like ancient Egypt was destroyed and fell, so is modern day Egypt going to be destroyed and fall. There's going to be a second Exodus, man. You know, when we get beamed up into the chariots. You know? The Lord is no longer going to be known as Yahweh that brought us out of the land of Egypt, but Yahweh that brought us up out of the land of the north, which is America, like it tells you in the book of Jeremiah. Because that deliverance was so great in ancient Egypt that it's still talked about today. And what the Lord is getting ready to do, he's going to trump that. He's going to trump that. So imagine how great this deliverance is going to be spoken about literally forever and ever and ever and ever. All right. So it says, therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them. That's the word afflict. With their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, right? So they just kept afflicting us, man, right? But the more they afflicted them, like it says in Zechariah 1, and I think it's 15, all right, that the Lord was just a little displeased with us. But they furthered the affliction. Woo! Ooh, because there go that word afflict, right? That's the spirit of the Lord. I wasn't even thinking of that. It was that Zechariah 1 and 15. Right? Yeah. It says Zechariah 1 and 15, it says, I am very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease. So the Lord is displeased with these other nations, man. He don't like these other nations. He's displeased with them. All right. It says, for I was but a little displeased. All right. Yeah. He was a little displeased because of Israel, right? Being wicked, right? It says, and they helped forward the affliction. So all these other nations afflicted us. They just kept going and going, man. You know? Come on, man. So that's why we're reading right here. It says, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. So now let's get the word afflict, right? It says to cast down. The word afflict means to cast down, and is that not what the nations did to us? Were we not cast down? Matter of fact, that reminds me, all right, when we read the book of Baruch, I think it's the first chapter. I think it's the first. No, it might be the second chapter, right? I'm gonna get straight to the point. It says Baruch 2:4 says, moreover, he has delivered them to be in the subjection to all the kingdoms that are round about us, to be as a reproach and desolation among the people round about, wherein the Lord Yahweh has scattered them. All right, that's talking about us being delivered unto these other nations, being held captives under these other nations, right? That's what Yahweh did. All right, it says, thus, verse 5, thus we were cast down, woo, all right, and not exalted. So the nations afflicted us, they cast us down. All right, it says, thus we were cast down and not exalted, because we have sinned against Yahweh. All right, our power, and have not been obedient unto his voice. All right, yeah, because we was wicked. So the Lord gave us into the hand of the other nations. All right, and we were cast down. We were afflicted by the other nations. All right, it says to afflict, to cast down. And I literally just read that we was cast down. It says right here. All right, verse 5, thus we were cast down and not exalted. All right, it says afflict, it says to cast down. All right, it says a sense now obsolete. It says from Old French afflictor, from Latin afflictere, to damage, harass, torment. All right, so we were tormented in ancient Egypt, and we were tormented in modern day Egypt. We're still being tormented. All right, through the poisoning of the water supply, the food supply. All right, breathing in chemtrails. The food supply is literally chemicals and drugs. There's not 1 ounce of truth in food, bro. Meaning, the food is, bro, even the organic and the so-called organic shit and good shit is all, that's poison too. You could read about that in a book called Population Control by Jim Marrs. The organic shit, the FDA just, they all these organizations that's supposed to check, do these checks on this organic food, they just be passing them by, man. It says so we were tormented in ancient Egypt, and we're being tormented in modern day Egypt. Look how we came over here on slave ships, bro. We were packed up like sardines, literally packed up like sardines stacked on one another, while we were laying in shit, urine, period, blood for months at hand. All right, so we were tormented, bro. We're still being tormented with the food. The food literally destroys us. Bro, the what the food does to us in this day and age is on. If you really knew, bro, if you really, you people that don't know just don't know, man. But us that are privy to it, the food destroys you on a whole nother level. That's being tormented. Because it does a number on our brain. It brings us depression. It gives us mental illnesses and all that. The food and chemicals that are in the food supply, the chicken, all the meats, right? The foods, the vegetables, even the vegetables, the fruits, and then don't even get me started with the junk food, the cookies and brownies and shit, right? It says to cast down, to damage, harass, torment. All right, frequentative, all right, of affligere, past participle, afflictus, to dash down, to overthrow. Were we not overthrown? Did it not say that in the in what we just read? Right? It says, moreover, he has delivered them Verse 4, moreover, he has delivered them to be in subjection to all the kingdoms. Yeah, we were overthrown. That are round about us, to be as a reproach and desolation among all the people round about, where the Lord Yahweh has scattered them. Thus we were cast down and not exalted, because we have sinned against the Lord Yahweh our power, and have not been obedient unto his voice. All right, come on, man. So let's get one more, all right, to show you that America is modern day Egypt. Revelation 11:11, spiritual Egypt, man. All right, is it Revelation 11:11? 11:8, my bad. It says, and their dead bodies, all right, meaning spiritually dead, dead from the neck up, right? It says, and their dead bodies, talking about the Israelites being spiritually dead. It says, and their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city. The great city, talking about America, all right, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt. So America is spiritual Sodom and Egypt. So this place is spiritual Egypt, man. And since nothing new was under the sun, like when you read Ecclesiastes, the first chapter, it tells us that nothing new was under the sun. So, you know, if spiritual Egypt, we were dealt very, very harshly and cruel, right? How do you think we was dealt with here in modern day Egypt, spiritual Egypt? Harshly and cruel, all right? And the Lord said he came to save us out of that hard bondage, right? Let's read that real quick before I end the video, all right? Isaiah 14, it says, for the Lord Yahweh will have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land. And the stranger shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob, and the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of Yahweh for servants and handmaids, and they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. Yep. And it shall come to pass in the day that Yahweh, excuse me, read that again. It says, and it shall come to pass in the day that Yahweh shall give thee rest from thy sorrow and from thy fear and from the hard bondage wherein thou was made to serve. Yeah, we served hard bondage here in America, ancient Egypt and modern day Egypt, which is America. It says, and from the hard bondage wherein thou was made to serve. And again, when you go back to the etymology of the word rigor, it says what? At the bottom, I think it says harshness, severity, dealing with persons for cruelty, right? Strength, hardness, right? Numbness, stiffness, hardness, all right? Firmness, rough, all right? Roughness, rudeness, all right? And when you go to Exodus back in 1 again, it tells us that we served that hard bondage in Egypt and also in modern day Egypt, because nothing new was under the sun, right? It says, where was I at? Verse 14, it says, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. All right, so Lord willing, this lesson is edifying. Yahweh Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Ratazah, this lesson is or was edifying. Call Halalyam, Yahweh Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rakal, Kwikdash. All right, until the next one, Shalom, Shalom.